just cut out. So it's all you.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, sir. That looks good.
Yes, we can.
Cool. Okay, like I said, this is my background. Working with Park City Angels, I ran this incubator and accelerator, the mill. And then Taylor and I met through a program called Get Seated, which was really short competition style funding. And so I want to kind of show you the differences between the two. And so we'll just start off with, this comparison between VCs and competitions. So most investment groups or investors have some kind of thesis. And if you're speaking to them, then the odds are that you already fit into what they're looking to fund. Versus when you're pitching to a competition, the panel makes all the difference. And we'll cover that a little bit more, but they're not really looking for anything specific necessarily, even if they say they are. Like if they're like, hey, we're looking for innovative healthcare that blah, 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 blah. In a venture style, that's actually much more true. Whereas in the competition side of things, it's not. There's a lot more nuance on the competition side than there is on the venture side. The next thing is that with VCs, they're really in it for the long haul. So, you're part of their organization. They want to get to know you. It's a lot longer process versus, you have this one-time event where we may never hear from you again, especially on the judging side. Like, I don't know how many times I've been on a panelist on a competition and I never followed up with the companies. And so it's really just a one-time event versus this long drawn out thing with the venture capital. And then VCs as a collective is kind of this semi-unlimited pool. So of funding. So if you're going after funding and one group funds you, there's probably another group that's interested in funding you, and so on and so forth until you fill up your round. Versus like these competitions, if you win competition 1 and then you go on to competition 2, there's no correlation that says you're going to win the next one. And so they're really like this kind of like semi-unlimited pool of funding on the VC side versus this one-time funding on the competition side. The bigger differentiation in a lot of these is really the time to present. So you might have 10 to 20 minutes to present on a VC or angel presentation versus a competition can be much shorter, somewhere around like maybe 3 or 5 minutes. And Tara, you can tell me, I don't know what the timeline is for your guys's, but I think it's a full pitch, right?
No, it's not. It's only a 3-minute pitch with a 2-minute Q&A with the judges, but the judges see everything that's submitted beforehand. So the 90-second demo and the submitted pitch deck that follows the sort of template, as well as your entry form submissions. So the judges know you before you get there. The 3-minute pitch is really designed to win the popular vote.
Okay. Yeah. So, so you can see that 3-minute pitch, if it is the first time it's presented, it can really be, it's very different from a full VC pitch. And I'll actually show you how to put that together as we get through this. But yeah, they're very different presentations, cover very similar materials, but this pacing is much, much faster. And then due diligence on the VC side is much longer. It can be months versus Okay, so it can be much longer versus the judging might take 10 or 30 minutes for after the presentations to kind of decide who they want to win. Sometimes like at the Utah Entrepreneur Challenge, the judging takes place like in the background, kind of like what Tara just mentioned, where like I might review some of the competition companies and then make an assessment prior to actually seeing them present. And so those are kind of a little bit of the differences. And then some other things here. For the VC side of things, like you're a portfolio company of theirs. And so they really take pride in who they're working with. Because again, this is a long-term relationship. The time for presenting your company is, can be weeks, months, even if you're meeting with different partners or you're doing a whole bunch of things, it can take a long time. And then you have this higher interest of where the money's actually going. Like Who are you hiring? What's the skill set of these people? Are they the right people for the company? So there's much more interested in what the money is going to be used for. Versus on the competition side, some of the things are like, the best presenter or the best business doesn't always mean that that's the winner. Like there's been a lot of times where you're like, man, this is such a good idea. But, in the competition side, you're like, well, maybe like this company over here can use the funding better, or whatever. So you kind of sometimes can change your mentality after you see all the companies present on the competition slide. And then typically what ends up winning in a competition slide is interesting over practical. So like I mentioned just before, not the best business is going to win, but sometimes you're like, for example, if you were competing against, say, like a flying car, you're like, man, that's such a cool idea, a flying car, like it's $1,000, like here you go. So what you have to do if you're a business that's more on the practical side, let's say, for example, you're a poop scooping company, which would never beat a flying car. Like you got to make it sound interesting. So you're like, we've got a social media following of 1 million people. And then you're like, wait, what? Like, how did you take this, what's deemed as something more practical? And then now you've created it to be much more interesting than the flying car company. So those are some differences. And then now I want to get into the actual pitch itself. And so walk you through guys that a little bit. So the expertise in the room can be drastically different on these. So like in Park City Angels, we have a lot of experts who have grown companies. On the competition side, it's typically pay to play. So for example, like maybe a big accounting firm is sponsoring some of the winnings. They might have one of their employees be a judge. They may not have, usually they get good people, but sometimes the person has no idea about venture or anything. And they're just being like, oh, well, I like these people. So that pay to play is very real in the competition side of things versus on the investor side of things. In the investor side, you have a lot more time to educate on the industry. So you might spend a lot more time like in the problem. You might spend, 3 minutes or so just trying to educate the community that's listening on what's wrong in the world, where in these really short presentations, you really don't have that much time. And so you have to be very clever or very skilled at presenting something if the majority of the group doesn't know what you're talking about. And like all pitches, don't memorize your pitch. It should come off as a conversation. And then don't use animations or transitions, especially in a short pitch presentation. You don't have time to wait. Like you really only have 3 minutes and it goes by very, very quickly. Don't use an agenda slide. I know that's common for people who are presenting. Don't do that. You want to keep, in any pitch, you want to keep it high level because the goal is to get questions. And when you're in a 3-minute pitch, you need to even take that high level, even more high level. So you're not giving very much details. It's more of like the concept than it is the business. And so you have to play around with words there. And then again, goal is to have them ask questions. And then you want your pitch to flow like a story. And so how much time do I have left here?
Take 5 minutes and then we can do Q&A.
Okay, so here's just, I've given this presentation before, but I want to go quickly through the pitch format, but every slide answers a question. So why are you here? This is an overview slide. In a regular pitch, I think you should have one. In a short pitch, don't. And then, what's the problem you're solving? How did you become aware of it? So again, this is a very, very important slide for both. Spend as much time here as you can. But if you need to go like on timeline, so about 30 seconds on the problem slide, and then 30 seconds on the solution slide in a short pitch presentation. On the business model side, keep it really simple. And then this should take about 15 seconds to get through. On the short, you can spend more time, obviously, on the investor side. And then the financial projections, again, no more than 15 seconds. Market size, no more than 15 seconds. And then the competition side, no more than 15 seconds. This is actually a really good slide in your short version because there's so much happening and you're like, we're better than all these people, but you can spend a little bit more time on the competition slide if you'd like. What have you done so far? The traction slide is very important in a competition slide or a competition pitch. And so again, if you're looking for areas to like cut, you can cut the competition slide and add more time here if you want. And then what you're doing next. In a competition, you really want to focus on what you're going to do with the funding. So let's say, for example, it's $1,000. You can say, I'm seeking, 200K right now, but with the $1,000, I'm going to do these 5 things. And that's a really big slide that most people miss on competition slides, is what they're going to do with the funding received from that event. And so I think this is a great opportunity to add that slide. And again, you don't spend much time here, 15 seconds. The team is super, super important on the investor slide, and the short pitch slide, it's not that important. So don't spend much time to say, hey, we got a really awesome team, and this guy comes from Facebook. Like, that works pretty good. The opportunity slide is very important, again, on the investor slide, not important at all on the short form. So you can skip this slide. And then you want to make sure that you have a really solid final slide. On the investor slide, it's the ask. And again, on this slide, it's going to be use of funds from the competition. And if you are actively raising capital, you do want to put that on this slide. So, I hope that was super quick, but I hope that gives you an idea of how you can take a full pitch and then kind of condense it down into a shorter 3-minute presentation and not lose any of the important stuff.
That's awesome, Tim. Thank you. Very cool. I'll kick things off just with one question to the group so that you guys can all have a minute to think about what questions you want to pummel Tim with. But to the group, how many of you, and throw your answers in the chat, how many of you are planning on applying for the Boom Startup pitch or any other pitch coming up, pitch competition coming up in the next few weeks or months? I think there's several in our Utah community going on, but just wondering how many of you are going to do that. Throw it in the pitch, and then we can all rally around you to help on getting you through these pitch competitions. Thanks for putting them in the chat. Please just unmute yourself. I'm running on my phone right now, so I'm not going to be a great host. So please just unmute yourself and start throwing questions at Tim as to how he could help you or guide you on putting together the best pitch you can.
I have a question about how pitch competitions fit into, I mean, you've got your experience at Park City Angels. How do you view the pitch competition? Is it like practice for the startup founder? Is it like something that they want to talk about when they come and present to you at Park City Angels? Where do you view the competitions as far as like fundraising goes?
So if you win competitions, I highly recommend putting them in your presentation. So like Amy at Rev Road, they have a competition that they do. If you win something like that, like those are good accolades for traction, especially if you're early stage. Even the Boom Startup one, if you win those things, are really good. As far as like, if you're like, well, we're competing in these, I don't think it's necessary, because if you don't win, then it doesn't matter. But if you're winning competitions, or that's how you got some of your early stage. So for example, like one of the companies I worked on in the past, we were part of the Bench to Bedside program at the University of Utah. And we won $25,000. So we were like, look, we won $25,000 from this. This allowed us to build these 5 things. And then now we're out raising money to do whatever the next thing is. So they can be really good talking points in the traction.
If I can add on one other thing, one of the winners of Boom's first pitch competition, I interviewed them afterwards because he just did so well, and he raised over $130,000 winning pitch competitions to avoid raising capital. And so if you just have someone natural on your team for pitching, etc., like you could literally make it their full-time job for fundraising, especially in the pre-revenue stage, which totally put them ahead. I thought it was quite savvy.
Yeah, I've seen that before too. I saw some guy raise like over $1 million just in pitch competitions, and they couldn't raise any money on the VC side. They just weren't there because they're two different worlds of presenting. And yeah, I mean, great companies example that won pitch competitions are Outlet Baby Monitors. They won the Utah Entrepreneur Challenge and then leveraged that win to now they're killing it. So here's a question that says, do you typically send in short slide decks for a pitch competition submission like Boom Startup, or a longer investor type slide deck, assuming no guidelines given? I think you need to send in whatever they're asking for, because sometimes they're very specific on what they want. So like sometimes it'll be like, we just want a 1-pager. You're still going to present your 3-minute one, but like whatever the submission is, just follow whatever they're asking. I would always lean towards whatever the presentation's going to be around as the submission.
And for Boom Startup in particular, we do have a suggested template, do the best that you can. The scoring is based on professionalism, traction, viability, reach, and innovation. It's not based on revenue. It's not based on customers or growth, the stuff that you find traditionally in, a VC pitch deck. So, we're giving you the flexibility, especially if you're pre-revenue, to go ahead and just put it out there as to what your intentions are. But we do suggest following the template to the best of your ability and make it as professional as possible.
Awesome. Tim, what are your thoughts on appendices slides in presentations like this for VCs versus pitch competitions, etc.? But how do you see appendices working best for people?
Yeah, I think in both cases you should have them. Again, they're almost the exact same pitch. It's just there's some smaller nuances. I think if you can always have something prepared, because in a 2-minute question or in a pitch competition, I'm gonna say this in a weird way. Sometimes you get really weird questions in a competition that versus in an investor one. In an investor one, there's very structured things that they're looking for. And the more you do it, the better you get at understanding what questions are gonna come. I've seen some very odd questions in competitions where you're like, what? Where did that even come from? So I think you should still have appendices, but realize again that the judging panel is very different in a competition for the most part than it is from an investment point of view.
Do you have any examples of some of those weird questions people could prepare for, or at least like know what topics they should be prepared to address in a pitch competition?
Yeah, so I say in a competition, always have prepared like more of how your product works, especially if it's something where you're educating people. Don't spend time in the pitch itself educating people in the market. Allow them to ask the question. And then that's when you can actually revert back to an appendix slide where you're like, okay, well, let me break this down a little bit for you. So here's how these 5 things work. It's much better to answer that in a question than in the pitch itself. I would say that's one way, but I mean, again, they can be really weird. Like, oh, well, my sister does this thing. And what do you think about and it had nothing to do with anything. So, but usually people are pretty good.
Tim, have you found a way to lead the questions that you want to be asked in the Q&A? I found just leveraging the Q&A time to lengthen the presentation and touch on things that you didn't have time for in the pitch is always nice, but sometimes they don't ask the right questions. Do you have any suggestions on how best to lead to the right questions?
Yeah, so when you're putting together your pitch and you're practicing it, the time you think that you're like over explaining something, that's really, really critical. And you're like, man, but I really need to talk about this. Like, think about a way where you can kind of skip over it so that a person notices you've skipped over it. So like, for example, it would be like, let's say the opportunity slide is super important. And I'd be like, make sure you have a really solid opportunity slide, but I don't really present it much. And you're like, well, can you tell me a little bit more about why that opportunity is so valuable, right? You can kind of allude to it and then kind of leave it hanging. A lot of people do that with valuations of their companies. So they'll say, and they'll do it on purpose. They'll be like, so, you know, we're raising 5 million, we're valued at 30 million, and we can talk about that later. So they kind of like leave that little hook so that a person comes back and asks about it. I don't recommend
Cool.
doing it, but that's a way of doing it.
Okay. Any other questions from the group? This is awesome.
Hey, Tim, I just saw I just actually downloaded your book yesterday on Audible. So
Cool.
congrats on getting it out there.
Thanks.
Wait,
Yeah,
it's on Audible, Tim?
Yeah, I just launched it like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Who read it?
I did.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I
That's
recorded
awesome.
it. I recorded it at the mill. I want some actual feedback because I know what I think about it. And so, yeah, Spencer, I'd love your honest feedback on the Audible. I think I'm going to redo it. So,
Well, it's a great start. I'm only 15 minutes into it so far, but
okay.
so far great.
I'm gonna go download it now. I didn't know it was on Audible. I've
Yeah,
got the Kindle version, but not the Audible. That's fantastic. Tim, just by the way, I'll do the shameless plug. Do you have a link to any of that stuff you can throw in the chat to your book? Because I'll say the book is awesome. It's got some amazing content in there that just walks you through how to put a good deck together.
Yeah, I'll link it in the thing. So I don't know how to link to the Audible version. Oh, I put it on LinkedIn yesterday. Let me find that.
Cool. Well, this is fantastic. I think if anybody would like to ask Tim additional questions or even like jump into some specifics about your particular company and how best to present it, he's got his email up there and contact info. I would highly suggest reaching out to him. And I'm hoping to have Jessica Kang from Techstars share some office hours when she can go through some pitch decks as well. I'm guessing that'll happen next week, and people can just sign up for office hours with her to review their pitch before the competition season begins. But Tim, this is awesome. Any parting words for the group before we shut down for the week?
You know, I recommend if you're going to be pitching, go to 1 million cups and pitch. Like there's nothing that beats getting real life feedback from other people. And be very like, you got to know who the audience is, but you know, you have to practice. A lot of people think they can just wing it. The pitch is super, super important, both on the competition side and the adventure side. And people don't give it enough credit for what it really is. And I really recommend, you know, obviously I want to plug my book, but there's so much more to a pitch than just the 12 slides or whatever. There's lots of little nuances that go on during that time frame. So take time, practice, get in front of other angel investors and other investors if you can. And there's lots of great resources here in Utah. And if you are raising capital, you know, and please apply for Park City Angels. I promise I'll take a meeting with you because I want to know what's going on in Utah.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Thanks everybody for joining. Really appreciate it. And we'll be back here next week, but tell anyone that you know who would be a good candidate for a pitch competition to look into this. And then also I'll post this video on the website as quickly as possible. Hopefully, if Tim